The emergence of prose writing was due to many things. For example, during the Renaissance, the age of exploration and the age of reason or science appeared. During that time, explorers, navigators, pirates were trying to circumnavigate the world by their ships and explore the different seas. They needed to document everything they were witnessing in different places and areas they were visiting, so a new form of writing was required. The verse poetic type of writing was not always necessary, and a new form of prosaic writing was needed. They started writing their stories in form of diaries, journals, adventurous writings, history logs, and the form of the novel appeared in the 17th century in England when Samuel Richardson was daring enough to write a didactic, educational, social story about a female named Pamela, the first novel in American history. In British history was called Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. By that time in America, writers were just copying their ancestors, and Pamela, of course, as a novel was copied and of course adapted to meet American life and American standards. This was considered by the British writers as a kind of plagiarism, and it was not acceptable. American writers needed to create their own form of expressing themselves, expressing their American identity. One of the most famous writers of the era was Washington Irving, who was considered and still considered a father to American literature because his innovative style and his capacity to create mingled imagination with historical events. His famous story, Rip Van Winkle, is a masterpiece of all time, one of the greatest writings, a writing or a short story about a man who sleeps for 20 years and then the moment he wakes up he finds everything changed. America is transformed and shifted from being colonial under the British Crown into becoming a new dependent nation. I am not going to retell you the story or the summary of the story because you can find it online and it is easy for you to find the summary of the story and read it. Of course, this story is full of symbolism, and that was the essence and the beauty of it in the first place. Of course, there is an elegant, casual style in Washington Irving's writing because he was able enough to create an emotional effect, a national feeling of the American exceptional man. At first glance, we as readers cannot understand this. It is only through understanding a very important part in American history that we can really interpret the story and grasp its meaning. Some of the critics consider that the story was not only about colonial versus revolutionized America, it is also about the aspects of shifting from Puritan life into the new nation. The Puritan aspect is depicted in the nagging, hard-working wife that emphasized always upon working and doing daily chores. The story, however, is interpreted by reference to that very important time in American history where the British Americans, as they were called, asked for their independence from the British Crown. The story here is rooted in its revolution because during the time where Rip slept for 20 years, there was a kind of revolution that took place. People changing destiny. People giving themselves the right to freedom. Creating the American exceptional man. Of course, Irving here brought many aspects into life, including the legend of Henry Hudson, the famous seafarer and commander who disappeared in the Hudson River at the Catskill Mountains many years ago, and they said allegedly that his crew killed him when mutiny started because of some things that they didn't agree upon. Because this Henry Hudson has never came back to England or to Holland. What's the relation of Holland here in the story to Henry Hudson? Of course, Henry Hudson was an English commander, but he wasn't sent to explore into the New World by the English. He was sent by the Dutch. The Netherlands or Holland was holding a very important part in American land that was called New Amsterdam. But in 1664, the British people tried to attack that settlement and they took over the land, changing its name from New Amsterdam to New York. And from that, they continued establishing new colonies or new nation, new states from New York to New Jersey and Manhattan, etc. Of course, the story of Rip Van Winkle takes place in New York in the River Hudson. This can both be seen as fiction and reality. And this is the genius, where the genius of Washington Irving lies, because he had the capacity to bring together fiction and facts. When the reader reads the story, you totally forget about you reading about fiction when you are mesmerized about the historical events, and then suddenly you start becoming kind of absorbed by the fictional aspects because of its beauty and creativity. So Irving gave America something it truly needed. It gave it an imaginative way of relating to their land. They needed that imagination to think about the hero. to think about the American exceptional man. This aspect is really a way to romanticize and narrativize reality. It is to think of yourself to be exceptional through fiction. Here, the sense of history was there because Washington Irving's cleverness was mainly in the way, or was shown mainly in the way he could depict the idea of American liberalism, American revolution, and the history of the American nation that was written with glory and greatness. The story, of course, depicts many things and symbolizes many things. We said that the wife was depicting the English crown, the old nagging English crown. Of course, Rip Van Winkle was depicting the lazy American man that American people did not want to really personify, and that's why maybe he didn't participate in the revolution and he fell asleep. And in that transition, everything was changed. The dog, which is the most significant symbol, I think, represents loyalty, represents obedience. Obedience that maybe it was a character, maybe it was a quality, personified in Rip himself through his dog. And even if he was barking without speaking, without acting. It's like barking at something without really acting against it. It's like Rip being constantly complaining about his wife without truly doing anything to stop her from insulting him, from always yelling at him. The dog, when Rip Van Winkle woke up, the dog was gone and the wife was gone, because George III, King of England, was no longer ruling America on the one hand, and because that aspect, that idea of servitude, that idea of being loyal to a British crown was gone. I think that's why when Rip woke up, he couldn't find his dog. Changing the gun may lead us to understand that aspect of weaponry meant that it's a new nation now. We have our own way of trying and defending our nation. We have our own identity now. Maybe that gun that he lost while he was asleep belonged to the British crown. At least this is my interpretation of things. Finding a picture of George Washington instead of King George III of England meant that America now has transformed into a republic and it is no longer a monarchy. Finding a nation that is full of youth, full of people who are inspired to change, means that it's time for the modern young nation to begin as dependent and as a fresh country blossoming and prospering apart from the old British continent, or the old British island, because most of Rip's his friends were dead. It wasn't really about them being there anymore, because it was all about that modern nation that was freed by young men, enthusiastic men, hoping to change their destiny. So, how is this a story about revolution and about revolutionizing literature and writings in general? Of course, here the story was written after the revolution, but Washington Irving tried to remind the people of their glory, of their Americanness, of their exceptional individuality, about the concept of the individual, who was the most important thing in American life. It's all about doing things and exploring into your potential. It is all about humanness. The story is, of course, revolutionizing because it spoke about history. It brought and originated that sense of history into it through the way he cleverly depicted or spoke about history and mingled it, intertwined it with fiction. This is all for now. I hope you find this useful. If you have any questions, please ask me or send me an email, inshallah. I wish you good luck in your exams. I am really apologetic for this inconvenience, and salam.